REWRITTEN! To be happy, Amethyst needs something to do. Whether it be to shapeshift, wrestle, or just eat junk food, she always needs something to amuse herself. She's always had a system of distractions. Whenever something bad happens or whenever she starts to think bad things, she's always able to direct her attention to something else and put off the problem. Some might disapprove of that, but it's been working for Amethyst since she emerged, so she was going to stick with it. As long as she's doing something, she doesn't have to mope over her own feelings. Sometimes the distraction can be something that actually helps fix the problem, something that could make it go away faster. One of the biggest challenges that she ever had was whenever Rose gave her life to bring Steven into the world. Rose knew that it was different for gems. Rose knew that she'd have to give up her physical form. Rose knew that she would die, but she wasn't scared. She was far from scared. She was excited. Amethyst hadn't been able to say the same, and neither had any of the other crystal gems. She was going to lose the big, strong quartz who she had looked up to all this time, the empowering, loving leader that Amethyst strived to be like. She still remembered asking Rose, near the end, how she was so glad to die. What she said had imprinted onto her memory for the rest of her life. "I'm not necessarily glad to die. I'm glad of who's going to take my place. Instead of thinking of it being me leaving, think of it as a new person arriving. I need you to promise me to watch out for Steven, all right? Keep him safe, keep him happy, let him live a normal human life. He's not my replacement, but once I'm gone, I'm afraid not everyone will believe that." That was when Amethyst found the new distraction. She was able to instead set her sights on gaining Steven rather than losing Rose. She had promised to be the best sister that she could be all those years ago. And even though their view of Rose had warped drastically since then, Amethyst still kept a tight hold of the sweet little kid that they'd all grown to love. But her hold had loosened. And apparently, before she even realized it, it had gotten loose enough to let Steven fall too fast for her to catch him again, leaving her watching helplessly as he plummeted down until he was corrupted. She couldn't take the noise of Beach City. Everyone was whispering, babies were crying, loud calls for assistance with this or that ringing out here and there. The crystal gems were all split apart. Everyone was in disarray. This type of chaos she didn't like. That was why Amethyst had crawled off alone, much like what many other loved ones of Steven seemed to be doing, just wanting to get away from it all, her mind fogged with regrets and wishes and promises to do better. But what she wanted to know, most of all, was why. Why had this happened? Why had Steven corrupted? What had happened that was so subtle that she hadn't picked up on it, but was so consuming that it ate him up until he was a monster? Amethyst didn't know what was happening, and neither did anybody else. All she really knew was that the last few days had been one of the most stressful ones of her life. Steven went missing in a literal blur of pink magic. She'd recognized the enhanced speed from whenever they were their fusion, smoky quartz, and reassured Garnet and Pearl that he hadn't disappeared into thin air. But they didn't know where he went. They'd searched, asking if anybody had seen him, alerting Greg and Connie and everyone that they met about the situation. It had seemed like Steven had completely vanished. And when he returned, days later and sopping wet from rainwater, immediately locking himself in the bathroom, Amethyst had just wanted to kick the door down and force him to tell them what was going on, but she didn't. She was afraid of him running off again if she got too pushy. All of them were afraid of that. So they assumed that he had everything under control, as he told them, since Steven was the best at that sort of stuff out of all of them. And they left him alone. That had turned out to be a big mistake, because when she'd gone down to check on him in the morning, he was gone again, leaving nothing but empty diamond essence bottles at the bottom of the tub and a cracked mirror. Not a single phone call, not a single text message, not even a note. They had been scared out of their minds. Amethyst knew that something was very wrong at that point. This wasn't like him at all. He'd been acting weird in the days that led to that disappearance, and then he crashed the van, and his words right before he sped off were so troubling. She was terrified that she'd find him already dead, either by somebody else's means or by his own. And now she knew that he'd tried to kill White Diamond. Whether it be a regretted accident or not, a part of him wanted that for long enough to take over and nearly go through with it. She knew that White had done horrible things to him. He thought that they hadn't noticed the awful scars dug into the softer skin around his gem. But everyone had done horrible things to him. Why did he just go for her? Why was he changing so much? Why was Steven avoiding them? What drove him to this? What could she have done to stop it? She looked up at a larger crash in the distance. It seemed like he had been toppled over to the ground, shaking from terror, his mournful wail carrying all the way to where she was. Amethyst wished that now, more than ever, she could be there for him, be his big, tough sister, and tell him that he has nothing to worry about and that she was there for him to talk to, just like always. Amethyst! She was shocked out of her thoughts at the familiar voice. She stared around for a moment, confused at where it had come from, before being alerted by, "Up here!" She looked up in time to see a group of very tired but still relieved gems flying towards her to land. It was Bismuth, Lapis, and Peridot, joined by 2 other lazuli gems that Amethyst had yet to become properly introduced to. All of them were smudged with filth marks, ragged and exhausted from their flight. Bismuth's bulky form was being held up by the crystal gem's Lapis, whose watery wings were flapping shakily, just like the other 2 nearly identical slender blue gems. Amethyst felt a small push of pride to see that their Lapis looked less winded than the other 2. Her gem leaped as she saw Peridot's tiny green figure perched on top of her metallic trash can lid, hovering with a face shining with sweat from the exertion of how long she'd flown. Amethyst had seen the group distracting Stephen while the town escaped. She had begun to get worried about them as their return took longer and longer, and she felt relieved that they seemed unharmed. "Peridot! Lapis Bismuth!" Amethyst exclaimed. "And 2 total strangers!" The group landed heavily, with Peridot's lid dumping her over onto the grass face first. She popped back up with a yelp of, "Did the students all get back safe?" Amethyst nodded and said, "Yeah, they're fine." "Are you safe?" Peridot gasped next, staggering towards her and holding her by the shoulders. Her light blue eyes gleamed with terror. Wait, light blue? Usually they were green, right? She noted that her yellow-tinted visor was gone. She also noted that she thinks this is the first time she's seen Peridot without it. Amethyst shrugged. "Yeah, just shaken up." "Oh, thank the stars!" Peridot wheezed, collapsing in her arms. "I didn't see where you went, and although I knew the probability of your escape was higher than mine due to your proximity to the diamonds, I still couldn't stop second-guessing my numbers." Amethyst held her up, giving the short lime gem a hug that she knew she'd needed, but didn't know how to ask for. "Worried for you too, Perry," Amethyst sighed. "And also, where'd your visor fly off to?" Peridot blinked in confusion, touching her face before realizing its absence. "Oh, I must have lost it." Gems have light composed clothes that come with their forms, so Amethyst expected for her to summon them back again. But she didn't. Instead, Peridot thought for a moment and said, "I can actually see better like this, but does it look weird?" Amethyst smirked and said, "Nah, I like being able to see your eyes." "Really?" Peridot perked up, her jay-blue gaze sparkling, not seeming to notice the warm blush to her cheeks. "Yeah, it's like you're not putting anything in between you and the world," Amethyst encouraged, waving her arm in a dramatic arc. "You're brave, dude." Peridot shivered a little, saying, "You think I appreciate your compliment, but I do not feel very brave." "I'd think that racing a giant corrupted monster while blasting fireworks into the sky is counted as pretty brave," Amethyst pointed out. "Correct, but I was screaming the whole time," Peridot mumbled, "and I fell once." "Still kept flying, though, right?" Amethyst grinned. "That has to count for something." Peridot straightened her back, thinking some more, a flicker of pride rising in her. I kinda ahem. "Sorry for interrupting this beautiful bonding session," one of the Lazulis, the one of curly hair, interrupted, not sounding very sorry. "But is Bluebird or Holly Blue Agate here?" She sounded demanding. No," Amethyst replied hesitantly. "Why?" That Lapis sighed. "I have to go regroup with them." She had a strange, flustered look to her face, as if she was trying not to look at the crystal gem's Lapis. She glanced at her from the side, and then flicked her gaze away with a purse to her lips and a scowl to her brow. And then, without much more of an explanation, she turned, spreading her wings, and flapped back into the air, despite her own fatigue, her wings moving stiffly like she was trying to look like she wasn't about to drop out of the sky. The other Lapis, the one with the specks of golden freckles, reached after her for a moment, almost wanting to stop her, but then she closed her mouth and dropped her hand, her pigtail drooping. Then the gold-freckled Lapis excused herself with, "I'm gonna just go. I don't know you guys, so, I'll just get out of the way now," and quickly scurried off towards the rest of Beach City, waving to them as she did. "Thank you for helping," their Lapis called, right as she disappeared from sight. Bismuth was rubbing her sore arms, a worried look in her eyes as she stared back at the horizon where the monster was rampaging. "Amethyst, we have really bad news," she began cautiously. "The corrupted gem is... we know. It's Stephen." Amethyst winced sadly, the cheerfulness from reuniting with Peridot fading off into grief that she had tried to escape from before. "We watched it happen." Pity deepened in the trio's eyes. Peridot drew back, her hand still on her shoulder. She seemed like she wanted to say something, but didn't know which words needed to go where. Finally, she just darted forward and hugged Amethyst again, without a word at all, her thin arms holding her tight. Amethyst knew that she wasn't good with emotional talk. She just appreciated the gesture. "Where's Pearl?" Bismuth asked, a hint of urgency to her voice. "She went off in the other direction. Over there, I think," Amethyst pointed. Bismuth immediately hurried off to where she had been gesturing to, concern tightening in her jaw as she went. Before anything else was said, they heard from behind them, "Oh, you're back?" They turned and were met with 2 pairs of eyes and 2 singular eyes. It was Spinel, Volleyball, Sapphire, and Ruby. Spinel's elastic limbs and body were stretched taller than she normally kept herself at. Amethyst knew that she'd grow bigger whenever she was stressed out, and she didn't even need to mention what the bouncy, jester-like pink gem was stressed about. Volleyball was very close to Spinel, a terrified hollow in her gaze. Her delicate hands were covering her cracked eye, the haunted look of dread in her pale expression. Sapphire and Ruby were practically glued together, as close as they could be without fusing. Sapphire was still blinded with her future vision, and Ruby was acting as her guide, holding onto one of her hands while the other reached around and supported her opposite shoulder, leading her safely forwards. The caring and worry in Ruby's eyes made Amethyst even more afraid. Garnet had split up. If this was bad enough for Garnet to split. "Is Sapphire doing any better?" Amethyst began, hoping for some sort of guidance from her. But Ruby's posture was reluctant and uncertain, hesitating several more seconds before responding with, "I don't think so. She keeps saying she can't see. I don't know if she means literally, or just with the future, or both." Sapphire seemed to leap back up to the surface just then, as if her name called her to consciousness. "It's everything! All of it!" she said deliriously, her singular glacier blue eyes snapping back and forth rapidly. "Ruby, I didn't see this coming at all, and now I can't see anything! We're all going to die!" Hey, it's okay, Sapphy," Ruby tried, holding her closer to try and comfort her. "It's not your fault you didn't see it. Of course you wouldn't foresee this." "But what was the missing piece?" Sapphire continued, distraught. "If it was enough to corrupt him, I should have seen it coming in several more timelines than I did. But I didn't! What part of this do I not know about? The probability of him corrupting due to an attempted assassination is so low. A successful one, maybe, but not an unsuccessful one. There had to have been something else. I don't know what happened to him. I can't predict anything at all." "I was wondering the same thing," Amethyst began, her thoughts brimming at the edges of her mind like a shaken soda. "How did this even happen?" She knew that it had to be more than just almost shattering white. But they hadn't been able to keep track of him recently. They had no idea what else he had done. Garnet had said before, during those days, that not knowing what was happening made it 1,000 times harder to pinpoint what timeline they were on. And apparently, a whole lot more had happened than they thought, if it was enough to lead to this. "I think I know a portion of it," Spinel began reluctantly. "I was listening to one of the human doctors talking to Steven's dad a few minutes ago, and it makes sense of what was happening before." What was happening?" Ruby prompted. Spinel thought over her words for a moment before sighing and saying, I think Steven's gem is becoming so violent because it's needed to be violent before when he was a kid, so it thinks that it needs that violence to survive now? I put it in a better way earlier. No, I think I get it." Amethyst nodded slowly in understanding. "It's like gem PTSD. Stuff like that's dangerous whenever he's half diamond. Instead of just making him suffer, it makes everyone else suffer too, because it thinks it's helping, when really it's just blowing stuff up." Sapphire had straightened up, her frosty blue eye ping-ponging between Amethyst and Spinel. "This has been building up," she said breathlessly. "But he's been hiding it. That's why I can't see it. I didn't know how bad he had gotten." She gripped her flowing hair, blinking fast before saying, "What else do we know? What else has been happening to him?" Amethyst remembered something that Stephen had said, right before the corruption. Something that she had tried to forget. Jasper. Amethyst had tried not to think about that, which had proven easy until now due to the evacuation. But the chilling fears were now crawling up her spine, the need to know if it was true growing larger and larger. I heard... She closed her mouth in hesitation, not even knowing how to word this. "I heard something about Jasper?" Spinel straightened up, beginning with, "Wait, you know what Jasper?" Amethyst nodded, her gem throbbing. She could sense the tensing of Lapis and Peridot. Neither liked that name. Lapis was her ex, who had been trapped in a toxic relationship as Malachite with her, and Peridot had been mistreated by her whenever they still worked under the same rule of Yellow Diamond. Spinel bit her lip, exchanging an anxious glance of Volleyball, who looked away sadly. Spinel began carefully. I'm sorry, but Stephen told us that he shattered her." Amethyst didn't know how to feel. Initially, it was like a kick to the gut, the fears finally confirmed in the worst way, blocking out every other thought. But Jasper wasn't their friend, not even an ally. Amethyst had been hoping for a new beginning with her after she had been uncorrupted, but she'd fought back and escaped, poofing bismuth in the process. Stephen had tried for years to convince her to calm down and live out a peaceful life with the rest of Homeworld, but Jasper had refused. Even though Amethyst had been angry at the stubborn courts for resisting them, she had been hoping that maybe Jasper would change. Still, she hadn't, and now she never would. Maybe that was why it was painful. Jasper was incomplete. She never made amends with Lapis. She never got over her mourning for a dead diamond. She never accepted Stephen's offer for a new life. Jasper was now broken, literally and permanently, and was never going to be put back together again. And even though Jasper was horrible, even though Jasper would have probably shattered them all if she got the chance, Amethyst felt the tears searing up in the back of her eyes. She turned back away from them, moving away from Peridot, curling her knees up close to her chest, her long, wild hair sweeping to hide her face. She could distantly hear similar reactions from Lapis and Peridot, a mixture of confusing, angering emotions that felt wrong in every way. That's it then, Lapis began, her voice strangely cold but not harsh. It's over. Jasper's gone. Are you okay? Peridot asked slowly. Lapis stared, misty-eyed, down at her sandaled feet. Then, after a long pause, she responded with a faded, I don't know, but I do know that Stephen isn't. She rubbed her face, turning her gaze upwards at the silhouette of the reptilian monster he had become. That must have started this. I know Stephen. If he shattered someone, it would destroy him. Stephen, a shatterer? Sapphire pulled them all back down to where they were, realization crossing her features. Yes, that would have done it. I see it now. Powerful shivers were holding Amethyst hostage as she told them with chilling certainty, like she was reading it from a first-hand report. That was where he went, to the forest, in Jasper's camp, to train. They fought. He won, but he overestimated how much Jasper could take. That was what he was doing in the bathroom when he ran back. He was trying to heal her with the diamond bottles. She stood up, gripping Ruby's hand tighter. But it didn't work. Greg said that he saw Stephen going back to the forest with a towel. Her shards were in there. He was going to bury her. The horrified silence felt louder than the howls of the monster behind them. He went to Homeworld to get help from the diamonds in hopes of learning to control his powers, but their quarrels only pushed him further. Bluebird forced him to come back home, where he began to corrupt, where he ran away again to Connie's house. The frilly blue gem shook her head and explained, but she couldn't help. He insisted she could. He broke down the door, and she was killed in the blast. That was why they were fused. Stephen thought he could pull her back to life, but it was too late already, and now... Dread dripped through all of them like a thick, dark toxin. Everyone was now watching the monstrous creature as it roared and thrashed, stumbling in a blind panic. Too far away for her to help. He's gone.